Okay, we're going to get started and we're going to continue with a discussion on humanistic, existential, and positive aspects of personality. But first, we should define our terms. When we talk about existentialism, if you look at the root of it, the root of this word is the concept of being able to exist. So existentialism is an area of philosophy that explores the meaning and purpose of human existence. And one of the principles which comes from Martin Heidegger is this concept of being in the world. And that is to say, the world cannot exist without someone to perceive it, and a person cannot exist without there being a world around them. So there is an interdependence between the person and the world that they live in. So we also talk about positivism. So a positivist focuses on the laws that govern reality, things like science, things that demonstrate lawful or regular actions. And then you have the concept of being a non-positivist, and these are individuals who focus on the subjective nature of reality. And as such, they don't believe in determinism. They tend to be non-deterministic. And ultimately, they see the world as a human construction. So as one's perception changes, so does their experience within the world. So this subjectivity becomes the focus of studying personality. And many of the existentialists and humanistic psychologists, they operate with the concept of a subjective reality. We also have a concept called phenomenology, which is the principle that subjective realities are considered valid data for study. So, long story short, subjective reality is one's reality. So this comes from the work of Albert Camus, who focused on developing courage to correct injustice, and Jean-Paul Sartre, who emphasized taking responsibility for one's actions, and ultimately we have free will, and we must use this free will to live a meaningful, authentic existence. So from this point of view, there is a phenomenological discrepancy. So if I experience event and you experience event, it's possible that we could have seen the same thing and experienced it very differently. So a phenomenological discrepancy is the acknowledgement that two people can see the same event but have different perspectives. And when I work with couples therapy, this approach is incredibly valuable because more often than not, a couple will fight about something, and one of the members of the team will say, "Well, I saw it this way," and the other partner says, "Well, I saw it another way." And it's possible that both members of that couple or partnership were correct. It's just a matter of vantage point and interpreting things through the prism of our own unique experiences. So another thing that's relevant here is when you take a non-deterministic point of view, you believe that people cannot be broken down into machines, as we might have described with the behaviorists, or as we describe with the psychoanalytic and psychodynamic traditions. There's more of an emphasis on free will rather than a stimulus input results in a behavioral output, or a implicit drive results into behavioral output. So ultimately, we believe that you have free will. So humanism. Now, humanistic psychology is oftentimes referred to as third force psychology. And if you think about it, when you say third force, that must imply that there is at least a first and second force for there to be a third force. So what gives? The first major force or driving approach to psychology was psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis felt that our unconscious drives and motives uh, predict our behavior. So if you can tap into the unconscious and tap into our basic drives, you could work on what's happening beneath the surface and modify behavior. Uh, no free will. From a Freudian point of view, there was no free will. You're just a bundle of drives, sex and aggression being the two dominant ones, and they drive behavior. Whereas behaviorism, they also believed in this concept of no free will, but instead of it being an unconscious factor that predicts or influences your behavior, they felt that it was environmental factors, environmental stimuli or triggers uh, cause behavioral outputs. So your first force is psychoanalysis. Your second force is behaviorism. Your third force is humanistic psychology. So what did humanistic psychology do differently? The first thing they did was reject determinism. They rejected the idea that all of your behaviors are predetermined. They said, no, people have free will, and it's important to embrace that free will because with that choice comes responsibility. So you have the power to change and grow. Another distinction, if you look at how we view mental illness. So from a Freudian point of view, you started with people who were sick, who had some form of neurosis, and the whole goal of therapy for psychoanalytic treatment was to take a person who had neurotic behavior and help them behave more typically or go from neurotic to normal. Whereas the humanistic point of view is it starts from the point of view of normal. We believe that people are normal, and the goal of therapy is to take normal people and help them reach their potential. So it's all about growth and potential in a humanistic spirit. Now, humanistic psychology, it draws upon existentialism. It acknowledges that our experience is dependent on our reaction to others and the reaction from others, if we're going to be complete about that. So there's an emphasis on just being as human beings and celebrating our individual differences. And the goal of growth is to help you go from being to becoming. So that would be self-fulfillment if you move towards becoming. Now, one key player is Martin Buber. Martin Buber talked about dialogues and how we speak. There's an I-thou dialogue, which was what Martin Buber said we should speak, and an I-it monologue, which is what drives pathology. So if a person uses the third person pronoun to describe another individual, they're using an I-it monologue, and it's almost as if things are happening to them and they have no choice. Whereas Martin Buber said that can create the ability to avoid one's responsibility for the matter or addressing things. Now, an I-thou dialogue embraces that we each have unique perspectives, and there's a mutual relationship between you and I. So if there were couples breakdown, an I-thou dialogue would embrace that potentially I'm playing a part in the relational distress just as much as you're playing a part. And it's mutual, but it's also equal. Whereas an I-it monologue, we tend to talk about the person as he always does this, she never does that. These kind of phraseology, it can create the sense of victimhood around the person who's talking about that relationship. So they focus on the utility of the relationship, but not the uniqueness of the individual who they're working with. Now, the human potential movement, this came out of the 60s, the hippie movement, and the human potential movement was an idea that people got together and they were brutally honest with themselves. They did a lot of introspection, self-disclosure, and emphasized becoming better individuals within society. Now, this concept of the human potential movement spurs on humanistic psychology to some degree, but it's still around to today. Now, another individual that is of interest is Erich Fromm. Erich Fromm, he was born into an Orthodox Jewish house, very knowledgeable about the Talmud, which is basically oral traditions that help interpret Jewish law. But his focus, that being Erich Fromm's focus was love is an art. And he felt that to build love with another person, it requires effort, experience, and knowledge. And unlike what you might see in a Hollywood movie where people just fall into love, he didn't believe that view of love is actually healthy or appropriate. Love happens when people are committed to building a relationship with one another. Love also allows us to overcome senses of alienation, right? From whether it be society or whatnot. Now, we tend to see, with emphasis on social media and status or clout, as people would say today, modern society pushes us to become more and more alienated from ourselves, other individuals, and nature in general. So it's interesting that with all the advances, we tend to be more alienated than ever. And so Erich Fromm did draw from religion and spirituality in his understanding of personality. Now, I will also say something else about love. In order to build love, you need to be both able to give and be able to receive graciously. Because if you only give, but you're never receive from another person, giving helps build connection to the other person. So you're building your bond with that individual, you're feeling more connected and you're feeling more love towards that person. But if you don't receive graciously from that person as well, you're actually blocking them from building love back. And the other piece, which is if you're only a taker, if you only receive, but you don't give, then that's also going to doom your relationship. So you need to be both a giver and a receiver to build a fullness of love. And that's how closeness happens. Now, to make matters a little bit more complicated, sometimes giving is taking, and sometimes taking is giving. What do I mean by that? I learned this valuable lesson when I was about 20, 21 years old. And I visited my grandmother in Florida. And I was living in Israel at the time. And I went to visit her in Florida, and she wanted to make me feel comfortable. So we went to their version of ShopRite, Publix. So we went to Publix and we start putting things in the cart. And she knew that I kept kosher, but she didn't keep kosher. but she wanted me to feel comfortable in her house. So she asked me to go shopping with her and pick all these items. And she bought pans and stuff like that. And, so she's trying to make me feel comfortable. And as we go up to the register, I have this great idea. I'm like, you know what? Grandma's on a fixed income. She doesn't have that much money. You know what? When it's time to pay, I'm going to sneak up there and pay. And that's just what I did. So I jumped in front of her, used my bank card, swiped it, and I was so proud of myself. I said, oh, look at me not forcing my grandmother to spend money that she may or may not have had. And I thought I was doing a nice gesture until I looked back and saw the horror on my grandmother's face. So as a grandchild, the role was to be gracious in receiving, because that's all she wanted to do was give to her grandson. So I actually, in giving, I stole an opportunity for her to give to me. So I should have just graciously received and let her build her love out, which is what she was trying to do. So interesting, right? So building love is complex. Sometimes giving is taking, sometimes taking is giving. But in order to build a relationship, both parties must give to one another and both parties must graciously receive from one another. Now, one more thing about love, and I promise I'll move on. When we talk about love, remember this principle. Love is not 50-50. I can't tell you how many couples keep scorecards. I did this, you did that, and ultimately it becomes tit for tat. So, and that builds resentment, because in every relationship, one member of the team, the partnership, the couple, is always going to give more than the other. So let me rephrase that concept you have. Instead of you saying love is 50-50, in reality, love is 100-100. What do I mean by that? As long as both individuals are putting in 100% according to their capabilities, that's good enough. Because always someone's going to be doing more than the other. But if you look at your partner and you say, you know what, they're putting in, they're giving their 100%, you're going to be satisfied. All right. So I talked to you a little bit about existential alienation, and we're being more disconnected than we used to be. And I talked a little bit about social media, but let's look at some research that suggests that we're a lot more disconnected than before. From the 1950s to 2000, divorce rate doubled. Out of wedlock birth rate went up 7 times, 700%. The percent of the population in prison went up 500%. Those individuals reporting anxiety and depression ranges between 5 to 10 times what it used to be. So what's interesting is that we have all these creature comforts, all the material wealth we could ever imagine, but yet we're struggling as a society. We're disconnected as a society. And I think it's important to evaluate why that might be. So people will say, when I get the job, my dream job, then I'll be happy. When I get my dream car, then I'll be happy. When I get that iPhone that I always wanted, then I'll be happy. And the reality is, it's not true. People are chasing objects and skipping the basics. So happiness should be internal. It should come from within, not, the fancy car, the house, or the job. And I'm not saying that they don't play a role in in pleasure and enjoyment in the world. But if that's what you're aiming for, there's always going to be a new car. There's always going to be a new house. There's always going to be a new phone. There's always going to be something new that's going to force you to continue to chase. And I'm going to come back to that later. But I just wanted you to think about some of the reasons why uh, a lot of these things are up. Now, Eric Frem talked about the concept of dialectical humanism. A dialectic is somehow a relationship between two or more forces. So, in dialectical humanism, he believed that we have a biological force and a social force that pull us in sometimes opposite directions or pull us in a direction that maybe we shouldn't. But one of the nice things about this is that you can transcend your biology, you can transcend environmental or social forces with free will. And so it's an empowerment of sorts to know that you can break free. Now, I wouldn't do justice to this lecture if I didn't talk about Carl Rogers. Now, Carl Rogers is known for being the father of person-centered or client-centered therapy. And the core value that Carl Rogers brings to the table is a sense of responsibility. We must live our life with a sense of responsibility, and we must live our life with purpose, and we must have a commitment towards growth and maturation. But who's going to get you there? Who's going to get you to the finish line? It's not anyone else's responsibility but your own. It's not your parents' responsibility. It's not your professor's responsibility. It's not your romantic partner's responsibility. It's not your coworker's responsibility. You have choice. And if you use that choice and you focus on growth and maturation, you will get there. But you have to commit to making choices on an ongoing basis. Now, so when we do therapy, we say it's client-centered therapy or person-centered therapy because who determines what the issues that you need to focus on or the issues of growth are? The answer is you. And I tell my clients this all the time. I might be considered an expert in psychotherapy, but I'm not an expert on you or your life. So I need you to be my guide and help me help you in therapy. Tell me what bothers you the most. What would you like to focus on? So instead of it being my personal agenda in therapy, you choose the therapeutic relationship and the agenda. Now, to build a relationship in Rogerian therapy, it's non-directive. We don't tell people what to do. It's very supportive. We give space to build the relationship. And there are 3 factors that are going to help you build a relationship with your client. The first one is genuineness. And genuineness is another word for saying being real, right? So who has a responsibility to be real in the therapeutic relationship? Well, certainly the client does, right? I tell my clients when I feel like they're being dishonest with me, you know what? You're as sick as your secrets. So we can continue to go down this road, but I'm not really helping you if you're going to be dishonest. So certainly the client has to be real. But what's nice about this model is that the therapist also can be real. They can be a human being. So in addition to being a licensed psychologist, they're also a person in the treatment room. So from Roger's point of view, you can put out there, I'm feeling this way. So it gives more space for the therapist to be open, honest, and self-disclose with their clients. We also if we're going to build a therapeutic relationship, we have to have unconditional positive regard. What is unconditional positive regard? We have to care for our clients for who they are, as they are, with no strings attached. Now, this is actually the source of problems in people's life, is that most of the time people have experienced what Rogers refers to as conditions of worth. Our parents, our teachers implicitly said things to us and they may not have even known it. So let's take an example. I love you when you succeed. That might be an implicit message you send to your child. Now, let's do a scenario. I want you to imagine that you are now at a little league baseball game and you're watching it. And now it's the ninth inning, the bottom of the ninth. There's 2 outs, the bases are loaded, and your team is down by 3. So if you get a hit, you keep the game going. If you hit a home run, you win the game. And if you strike out, the team loses the game. And in this scenario, I want you to imagine that the person strikes out. So now the team lost the game. There are 2 types of parents at that game. One type of parent hops the fence, grabs the kid by the jersey and said, "Why didn't you hit the ball? We lost the game because of you." Well, when that parent does that, that parent sends a message to their child, "I only love you when you win. I only love you when you succeed." And that's kind of messed up when you think about it, because that adds a lot of unnecessary pressure on the child. Now, a second kind of parent might hop the fence, grab the kid, put them in their arms, give them a hug and say, "That's okay, we'll get them next time," and still take the kid out for ice cream as they always do. Now, that would be an example of unconditional positive regard. Look, I love you as my son or daughter, whether the team won or lost. I love you. So what, we lost? It doesn't change anything. You still tried your best. That's unconditional positive regard. So the child learns the love for them is beyond any particular performance. But in life, a lot of people put conditions on love, and that's the source of problems. So as a therapist, we have to embrace our clients for who they are, as they are, with no strings attached. And how do we do that, though? Like, it's a tough challenge for clinicians, because your clients are going to tell you a whole bunch of things, some of which might not match your value system. And now you have a choice to judge them or embrace them, right? So that's really the choice you have. But the goal of a therapist would be to embrace them, even if they make choices you might not ordinarily do. So how do you do that? The answer is empathy. Empathy is the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. Imagine what it's like to be them. Think about the experiences they had. And if you had those experiences, I want you to ask yourself, might you make similar choices? And if the answer is yes, then you're demonstrating empathy. Okay? You're putting yourself in their shoes and you're trying to understand them. And that's empathy. So Rollo May is another key player in humanistic psychology. He focuses a lot on anxiety. And Rollo May talked about anxiety is triggered by any sense of threat to our core values. So he put a lot of emphasis trying to understand individuals' values and how people live within their value system. Now, factors that are linked to anxiety or isolation, having meaning or purpose in life. If you have isolation or if you lack purpose in life, that's going to increase anxiety. And yeah, so one benefit of Rollo May's work is its application to support groups, to allow people to deal with various illnesses and help each other borrow strength from one another, right? And because we can see a difference when we put it through the prism of another person. Another major player is Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, his major emphasis was on free will. Viktor Frankl said everybody has free will. And he wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, it split up into two parts. The first half of the book describes his experiences during the Holocaust. And the second half is explaining his version of therapy, logotherapy, which is our search for meaning and purpose in the world. And what Viktor Frankl found was that everybody has free will. And that is a very bold claim from a person who endured the Holocaust. If there's any individual who could say, you know what, the world is screwed up, and sometimes you have no control over the world, it could be someone who experienced mass genocide. But that's not what Viktor Frankl said. He said you still have free will. And what choices does a person have during the Holocaust, right? Well, you would say, well, maybe, they have none because they are stripped of their names, they're stripped of their clothing, they're stripped of their identity, they're told when to wake up, they're told when to go to sleep, and so forth. So you might say a person experiencing a Holocaust has no free will. So he said that's not true. When the guards come to wake you up, you have a choice whether to get out of bed or not. If you get out of bed, you may live to see another day. If you choose not to get out of bed, they're certainly going to kill you in the barracks. So that's a choice. When they serve you moldy bread and chicken stock soup, you have a choice. Do you eat it? Do you not eat it? Do you eat part of it? Do you stash some away and give it to a weaker member in the barracks to help them live a little bit longer? These are all choices. And what Viktor Frankl said was the reason why he survived was he found the little choices he could still make during such an inhumane experience. And as long as they couldn't take away these little choices, he had a sense of purpose. Now we also have Abraham Maslow. Most of you have heard of Rogers and Maslow, likely from an introduction to psychology course. So Abraham Maslow has his hierarchy of needs, and he has four D needs or deficiency needs, and then he has a B need, which is a being need, right? So Abraham Maslow felt that in order to self-actualize or reach your potential, you needed to satisfy all of these basic needs. Now, your physiological needs, these are physical things like food, drink, sleep, sex, these basic physical needs. Safety needs, these are both physical and emotional safety. Love and belonging, feeling attached to someone or something beyond yourself. Esteem, feeling valued within society. And that's how you reach your potential. Now, when we talk about self-actualization, we all have, according to Maslow, the basic tendency towards growth and reaching one's potential. Now, Maslow wasn't the first person to talk about self-actualization. If you look at Carl Jung, he talked about the whole person, or William James, right? Each of these individuals talked about reaching one's potential. Now, a buzzword that's linked to self-actualization is teleology, which is your grand purpose of one's life. Now, interesting to note, you get to your potential through a series of choices. So free will is still part of this. You can make choices that bring you closer to reaching your potential, or you can make choices that bring you farther away from reaching your potential. So your choice matters. Now, here's examples of people during Maslow's time who he thought were self-actualized or historical figures. People like Albert Einstein or Eleanor Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington Carver. These individuals, he felt, reached their potential. Now, how do you get there? You're going to have peak experiences. And now this is what William James referred to as mystical experiences. And these peak experiences tend to happen when you have this almost magical moment where you have incredible clarity. Time tends to stand still, and you have a major choice to make. And that choice is going to bring you towards your goal. So if you make the right choices, you'll reach your potential. If you make poor choices along the way, it's going to bring you further away. Now, before I talk about happiness, I want to say that Maslow and Rogers had very similar ideas about reaching one's potential. And if you were going to look at their theories, about 90% of what Rogers and Maslow said would be identical. But what happens to a person who's self-actualized? According to Maslow, a person who reaches self-actualization reach the top of the mountain and they're forever changed. Whereas according to Rogers, he uses the term fully functioning person. Rogers believes that you have to continue to do work to maintain that status. It's almost as if life, you're walking up an escalator that's going down. So if you continue to walk up the escalator, you're going to continue to move forward. You're going to continue to grow. But as soon as you stop working on yourself, you're going to regress. So there's no such thing as taking it easy. There's no such thing as plateauing, because as soon as you plateau, you regress, according to Rogers. All right, so now let's talk about happiness. So what makes a person happy? The first thing that we see is it doesn't matter the circumstances you come up with or you come from. So there are people who are incredibly happy that grew up very poor, and there are people who are incredibly happy that grew up very wealthy, and vice versa. So there are people who grew up with a silver spoon and are incredibly miserable. And then there are people who grew up with a silver spoon and understood the power of wealth, and they stayed happy. So happiness is really a subjective sense of well-being, and it has elements, personal traits, the way you think. So more optimistic explanatory styles are going to result in greater happiness, internal processes. Now, I talked a little bit about happiness, and I talked to you about alienation. One thing that we see is that money does not buy happiness. So if you're chasing money and that's your goal, there's always going to be something else. So my definition of happiness isn't an emotion. Most people think of happiness as an emotion, but happiness is actually a state of mind. And it's a state of mind in which you focus on the things that you have rather than the pursuit of the things you do not have. Think about that. I'll say it again. Happiness is a state of mind, a cognition, in which you focus on the things that you already have rather than a pursuit of the things that you do not have. So, if you want to be happy, there are many things you could do. You will be happy in the service of other people. When you help other people, it makes you feel good. Happy people tend to monitor their wealth seeking, because at a certain amount of money, you have enough money to enjoy life. Happy people tend to look for awe-inspiring experiences in their life, such as sitting at the foot of the Alps, the Swiss Alps, and just looking up at the magnitude of the mountain and realizing how small you are in comparison. That is awe-inspiring. Writing a journal, keeping in a list of your accomplishments, not to brag, but to take stock on where you are in life. It's okay to celebrate your accomplishments. Avoid television. Happy people don't spend a massive amount of time daily watching television. Television actually takes you away from being connected with the world. You check out when you're watching television rather than living in the world. Happy people set long-term goals. And then if they have setbacks along the way, they get up, they brush themselves off, and they continue to overcome and quickly move beyond their personal failures. Now, everybody has a tendency to be happy or sad, and we recognize that. Because it's a combination of biology, experiences, and how you see yourself and your current situation. There's so many factors that affect your happiness. Now, what I'd like to do before talking about Seligman is give you a 3-step process towards a happier you. This would cost you money if you were my client. So step 1 to being a happier person is to write a gratitude list. Take 20 minutes out of your day and write a list of all the things you're grateful you have. Easy, right? Actually, it's not easy at all. Because for the first 5 minutes, you're going to be flying through the list, writing things like, I'm happy that I can walk. And you might just write walk, vision, hearing, and you put all these things you have on a list. First 5 minutes, you're flying through. Second 5 minutes, it gets a little bit more challenging, but you breeze through that. Third segment of 5 minutes, now you're between 10 and 15 minutes of the exercise. Now you're starting to struggle, things are starting to slow down. By the last quarter, last 5 minutes, you're starting to get creative because you've run out of ideas. You might say, I'm happy I have an innie because I can collect lint in my belly button. Something obscure like that, right? So you write that list. Take the 20 minutes to put all the things on paper that you have. Step 2, towards the happier you. I tell you, carry that list in your pocket for a month. And every day, your assignment is to add one new thing. Now, you might think, well, what's the point of this? The point of this exercise is to keep you looking for blessings in your life. Look for things that you have in your life. And the list you already started with is fairly long. So you might come up with, like, did I say I'm happy I have socks? And you go on the list and it's already there. Well, guess what? You have to keep looking. And what this does for a month is to shift your mindset from criticism to gratitude. So we're moving you towards a mindset of gratitude by adding one new thing. Now you're treating it as a game, looking for new things that you have. And step 3, after that month of adding new things, you come into my office, or you're going to do this on your own. And I ask you to take that list of all these things you have, and I want you to rank order them from top 1 to all the way to the one that's still appreciated, but it's you're the least grateful for. Now, if you're going to compare things on your list, some things are going to be easy. So I mentioned things like vision and socks. If I ask you which one are you more grateful you have, most people are going to pick vision over their socks. It's going to be higher on their list. But other things are going to be a little bit more challenging. How about vision versus hearing? Vision versus hearing, you might say, wow, that's a tough choice. I don't know. So in order to help you make that choice, I would say, imagine you had to give one of these up. Which one would you keep? Which one would you give up? Now, most people choose vision as human beings because vision is our primary sense organ for survival. And that's what you might do. So you put this list together, and then at the end of this 3-step process of getting you to be happy, I say, and you know what the beauty of this whole thing is? You don't have to give any of them away. You have all these things. You don't have to trade out vision and hearing. You just appreciate them a little more and understand their value in your life. Now, the other thing that this is nice is because I guarantee you, if you live long enough, you will experience disappointment. I guarantee you, if you live long enough, you will experience setbacks. You will experience heartache. So let's say you had your romantic partner and they were number 37 on your list of things you're grateful for. And then that relationship doesn't work out. You broke up. You know what that means? Even in the heart of despair, even in the midst of that sadness, there were 36 other things that you have that you valued more than that relationship. So it helps you shift your focus away from, oh my God, I lost the love of my life, to, wow, I still am full of blessings. And that helps you shift towards a happier mindset. And there are going to be people. There are going to be people who look for things. There are people who go on vacation. Blissful time. Everything is perfect. The sun is shining. The ocean is, the waves are going in the background, and you're eating your favorite meal. Beautiful experience. Trip of a lifetime. And then there's going to be a person who says, oh, wait, you forgot the mustard. And instead of focusing on the beauty of the experience, they're focusing on the fact that you didn't put out mustard on the table. Those individuals are not going to be happy. If you take a bigger picture, you will be happier. So I go back to my definition of happiness. Happiness is a state of mind in which you focus on the things that you have rather than the pursuit of the things you don't have. And there's an interesting proverb. Man will die with less than half of his desires fulfilled. So if you choose the opposite, to focus on the things you don't have, and you continue to chase, you will never be satisfied. You will never be happy. So let go and celebrate the things you already have. And that's my sermon on happiness for today. Now let's continue with Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman and several other people take existential psychology and humanistic psychology and turn it into positive psychology. And Martin Seligman realized that a lot of psychology focuses on the negative, focuses on pathology. And he was one of the individuals who shifted the focus towards positivity, things like hope and creativity and wisdom and spirituality, all of these are absolutely important to studying the human condition, not just anxiety and depression and schizophrenia and learned helplessness, which was one of his concepts. You can focus on positive forces in a person's life. Now, we do create positive illusions, and this is a coping mechanism where we tend to help deal with misfortune by looking for a silver lining or whatnot. But people who are happy tend to live longer. They tend to be healthier. So happiness could be the difference between life and death. And I implore you to choose life and choose happiness. So, what are the applications of hope, creativity, wisdom, and spirituality to mental health? We see that these factors reduce the risk from mental illness. We see that these factors provide a sense of empowerment or internal locus of control. So things like spirituality, which were dirty words early in psychology's beginnings, are now part of the process. And there's something called spiritual coping or religious coping, which help people deal with adversity. Now, David Myers wrote a book called The American Paradox. And in this book, The American Paradox, he draws attention to the fact that we live in a time period of unparalleled material wealth. But we also live in a time period of unparalleled psychological depression. And it's interesting, right? So you can have all these creature comforts like I've talked to you about before and still not be happy. Let's take an example. Someone like Tiger Woods. I want you to think about Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is arguably one of the best, if not the best golfer of all time. Tiger Woods is a billion-dollar brand. Tiger Woods fell in love with a supermodel, objective beauty, not subjective beauties in the eye of the beholder, but objective beauty. And yet, with all that wealth, with all those things, he still managed to cheat. What's the point? Unlike the lesson I told you about appreciating the things you have, he didn't appreciate what he had. Having a supermodel wife didn't matter because after a while, she became just another thing in his life. And even if she was the most beautiful woman in the world, because he was not satisfied, someone who was less beautiful could become attractive in his eyes and distract him from his purpose. And that was a costly mistake. It was a costly mistake to his reputation. It was a costly mistake to his brand, but it also cost him true love. So, once again, all the material wealth doesn't matter. All the recognition doesn't matter if you don't appreciate what you have. All right. Now, Eric Frem talked about money, and capitalistic countries tend to have cultures of consumption. They tend to have higher rates of alienation, and alienation, they tend to have higher rates of depression. So now let's pull back big picture and do what we do with all the lessons. If we're going to take this lesson, the humanistic and existential approach to personality, what's the analogy for human beings? Human beings are free, sentient beings seeking spiritual fulfillment. That is how people are viewed in the world. The benefits of this model is that it celebrates the struggle for self-fulfillment. It celebrates free will. It celebrates the spiritual nature of a person. It doesn't pathologize an individual. It looks at individuals as healthy and well-adjusted. It allows unique experiences to be valid, not just the general statements. But this approach also has some challenges, right? Some of these challenges are pre-positive psychology, but some of the principles of humanistic and existential psychology, they tend to be very theoretical. They don't, there's less statistical processes or quantitative measures there. There are contradictions. So sometimes when you have ambiguous or inconsistent concepts in this approach, they're allowed to maintain. And then some don't deal with reason sufficiently. Now, free will is absolutely essential to the human condition. This model of all the 8 models of personality, this model is the most strong for free will. How do we assess personality? Interview, self-exploration, art, literature, creativity, self-reports, observations. And in terms of therapy, right, we encourage self-knowledge. We put an emphasis on authenticity, unconditional positive regard, empathy, and so forth. And this is a radical transformation from Freud and Skinner, which we've talked about earlier. So let's stop here, and we'll continue with a person-situation interactionist theory next week.